Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
Having a desirable place to work needs to be something that is top of mind if you want to deal with attrition, and if you want to keep your people, and if you want to have a healthy company. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Hello and welcome to Self Smarter. I'm Megan and this is my friend and co-host Danelle.
Hello.
Those of you that are watching today, you have such a nice treat because behind us is a beautiful skyline of New York's 11th Ave.
Yes, it is.
Where are we recording today?
We are in my apartment here in Hudson Yards.
Oh my God, it is so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
So those of you who you're just listening right now and you don't go to YouTube, thanks a lot. Just kidding. No shame there. We will share some pictures of this view for you on Instagram. It's just so pretty. Why not look? You said the president came down 11th Ave the other day?
Yeah. I looked out the window and I noticed that there was no traffic in the middle of the day. No cars on the road. And then I noticed a lot of police officers. I'm like, what is going on? Because this is a very busy avenue. And and then all of a sudden here comes the whole entourage.
Ew.
Yeah, it was interesting. And they were going the opposite direction.
That's
so
the coolest
11th
thing.
Ave is one way and they were going the opposite. And then they circled around. So it was an interesting thing to see.
I wonder if they were going to a helipad or something.
I don't know. But yeah, welcome everybody. This is my New York space, so welcome to it.
Did you get it for the view? Did this view do it for you?
The view does not suck, and I love that I can see the Hudson and I get multiple downtown views. So yeah, it's a special place. So come visit.
Yes, come visit. So David is here, our producer, who we talk about quite often. And he and I were talking this morning, and I was saying, where this apartment is sort of Midtown West.
Correct. It's west, definitely west.
And those of you who visited New York or live in New York and you're listening to this, you know that New York can be very loud. Mm-hmm. You hear a lot of sirens a lot. That's for me, that's a sound. Or honking, like all those things over and over again. Over here on the west side, there is none of that.
Well, I mean, there's some, but
I didn't hear any.
I know, but it's definitely a muted version compared to other parts of the city. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So my point is if you're visiting New York, first of all, hit up D. Secondly, if you like the quiet, like more quiet, as it's still New York City, and the vibe is still awesome around Hudson Yards. It's just a little bit more. It's a little bit less hectic, I would say.
Yeah, and there's other parts of the city that also have that particular characteristic. It's just most often not what's visited by those of us
normal
or tourists, or if you're just visiting the city. So yeah, the West Side is fabulous. I love it, and I'm so excited to have you here and David here and recording in the space. I'm very excited about that.
Thank you. So today we're going to dive into where do happy people work. So talking about happiness at work. And I remember you were there. I remember when this client said this. I won't mention who it was or who they worked for, but it really struck me. And it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, but they said, if I weren't having fun at work, if we're not having fun at work, what are we doing? And of course she is a 7 on the Enneagram. That's what you would expect for a 7 to say, something like that. Like, if we're not having fun at work, what are we doing?
Right.
But in that moment, I don't always think about that. I do think work is fun. I didn't think in that moment I was having fun until she said it.
Right.
So then from then on, that's a thing for me. Am I in a room, if we're doing something creatively, one would think it's fun.
Fun, right.
So that's when we've woven in that question to people into our interview process, or at least I do. I'll say, what does fun at work look like to you? And
it's interesting because we had to figure that out, because what was fun to me is different for what's fun to others. And so that is, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but that was a revelation too, is people have different opinions on what that looks like. So
what's interesting for leaders is, are we making it fun? That was the big question I was asking me.
Right.
I asked myself first, am I having fun? And then when I came to the conclusion that yes, indeed I was, yay. And then I thought, well, how can I make this more fun for others? So that's just, we're going to dive into more statistics and data and things for you guys to consider today relative to happiness at work. But I thought it would be fun to lead off with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we jump in, let's pop to our quick advertisement. Okay. What I'm about to tell you is no joke, podcast listeners. One of the things we pride ourselves on at DMA is our ability to analyze marketing performance with the best of them. To share the love in 2023, we're selling our competitive assessments for businesses 50% off our regularly published price. That's right. To find out more, connect with me at info@dma-solutions.com and find out how we can put you in a position to win smarter in 2023. Okay, so let's talk about why the topic of happiness at work is important. And also, no doubt about it, people have options now. And I think that's really the big, not discovery, that's not a discovery, but it is a result of the pandemic. There was the Great Resignation. There's the quiet quitting.
Yeah.
There's all these things happening.
I think, if I think back on it, reflecting on the notes that you put together for this topic, for me, I think was led prior to the pandemic, led by millennials and their attitudes toward work and their expectations. So as they came into the workforce,
fair enough,
I feel like they weren't going to just settle. And I say
for what their parents settled for, potentially.
Exactly. And so I think that started a shift. And then obviously, in my opinion, and what we felt and what we observed, is the pandemic accelerated people's ideals around, I have other options of where I can go work or not work at all, or whatever wherever they work, and in terms of their happiness. But that became something that was a lot more prevalent. And I know for a while we could just point our fingers at millennials for having, every generation has their, we're Xers and,
we're stuck in the middle.
Stuck in the middle. But we're
hybrids, really.
Yeah, I would think so. But I'm talking about the stereotypes for each generation, right?
Hybrids.
We were slackers, which is hardly the case for the two of us. However, millennials can carry a badge of entitlement, and there's other things that go along with that. And I think what was happening is that they were really looking for more fulfillment in the workplace. And I'm not sure that a lot of companies valued that until we were absolutely forced to do it.
That's really smart.
And that, when I think about happiness at work, and for us, if you listened to our podcast, you can go back and listen to episodes 2 and 3 where we talk about when our culture was not healthy, and when DMA was, at times we could have fun, but it wasn't a consistent place where people were happy. And that started with me. And so then when I got the lovely results of the 26% approval rating, then we started to really look at our environment and think about things differently. And, I come from a mentality where I don't think that anyone's responsible for my happiness. And so that doesn't mean I'm not a happy person, but it's like not on you to make me happy.
Right.
And so that's interesting dynamic for leaders. And so where I think that companies that excel in this area, and I think we would score quite well as a company with all the work that we've put in to become, I think when you put people first, like that's the metric that matters the most, is when you're talking about people's, is this work and this company helping you to become a better version of yourself by working here and doing this good work? And if the answer is yes, then to me, I think that is when companies can really start to think about happiness as being something that can be obtained.
Right. So interesting point, because we are going to talk about employee engagement and how the happiest people, where they work, how that all kind of sums up into what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So so listeners, I'm gonna give you some data just to think about. So in terms of where are we now? What does the labor landscape look like? Work labor. Like when I was thinking about this podcast, I'm thinking, okay, what is the unemployment rate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if people were that unhappy, there was the Great Resignation in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
In April of 2020, we hit an all-time high. I think it was 15% unemployment rate. I thought we were still doing very poorly there.
Mm-hmm.
But
in terms of unemployment?
Unemployment.
Employment, okay.
Yeah. So as of January 2023, the U.S. Department of Labor reports that the unemployment rate is around 3.5%, which equates to a healthy percentage of the United States population, 16 and older, who are gainfully employed. The revelation was that they changed jobs. They didn't. So I might have been a server in a restaurant. Mm-hmm. But I might have changed to now become something else.
Right.
I didn't go back to restaurants. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just a tiny example of potentially a larger thing. But let me just give you some facts that I found. According to the Department of Labor, in August 2022, so a little bit more dated than what I just said, 60% of the total U.S. population were gainfully employed. Mm-hmm. This includes 16 and older. Another fact, research by Mckinsey and Company reveals that of employees that chose to quit their jobs from April 2020 and April 2022, 65% of those did not so far return to the same industry.
So for 2 years, 65% did not return to
their same industry.
Wow.
So they got a job, but they went to something else. Mm-hmm. And then the question then became for me, like, why have people been quitting their jobs? And there's this quote at the top of the list are the classics. This is from that McKinsey report. Lack of career development and advancement and inadequate compensation. We always go back to money, right? Like as leaders, you can't help it.
Sure.
Because money is a business.
Right.
So, and people are a business. And so compensation, I always thought would be the reason why. No. The data says otherwise. And so we're going to talk about that. The importance of a good leader is also highlighted with the third most common response of this report saying they have uncaring or uninspiring leaders. That's the third.
Wow, and that's why they were leaving.
That's why they were leaving, okay?
So I'm not surprised by that.
Really interesting. And then another point I want to make about this specific report was a quarter of respondents said that a lack of workplace flexibility was a factor, which is an issue acknowledged within varying degrees of enthusiasm, meaning, okay, 50% of our work population cares about flexibility, 50% doesn't, you see? Mm-hmm. So, and we found that to be true at DMA as well.
Absolutely.
Some people care, some people don't care. And success since swaths of the global workforce realized that working from home was also possible during lockdown. So for those generations that you were talking about that wanted something different, it was like a great awakening.
Yeah.
Like eyes open, oh, I can do this from home, so why don't I? Mm-hmm. Right? And so companies like ours have transitioned to more hybrid and quote unquote flexible nature. Mm-hmm. All right. So which begs the question, where do, in fact, happy people work? Mm-hmm. You're going to talk about the specific companies, according to one report. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention that we do use TINYpulse, and we've talked about TINYpulse before. For those of you who do employee engagement strategies as leaders, as executive leaders or team leaders, it's an option. It certainly gives you a pulse of what's going on within your own walls. TINYpulse recognizes companies that engage their teams and find positive shifts in employee sentiment about their place of employment, their role, and their compensation. So we are a part of TINYpulse, hundreds of companies. I'm talking about major corporations. Mm-hmm. They recognize through data who are the top 10 who have actually transformed since they started with TINYpulse, pulsed, and then pulsed again and cross-reference that data, the TINYpulse analysts.
Okay, so let me clarify some things.
Yep.
So TINYpulse is an employee engagement tool. So just for those of you who have, maybe this is the first time listening to the podcast, we've talked about it a lot, but that's what it is. And what Megan is describing is that as a company who uses this engagement tool, we see obviously our own results, which all of this is completely anonymous the way we use it.
Yeah.
You can use it in multiple fashions, but we use it as completely anonymous. And you get your results, but then the questions, because they're organized in a particular way, you can see what the average is of all the companies
that belong to TINYpulse.
And you can pick the type of company. So you can see a lot of additional, which kind of gives you a bit of a benchmark. And you should establish your own benchmarks in terms of employee engagement, whatever tool you may use. But why we chose TINYpulse was because we wanted to also see how other companies were tracking with these particular questions. And of course, you can customize and your questions to your liking, but I think that was really important, and it was good for us because you shouldn't just ask a question once and expect that result stays the same. You need to make sure that you're progressing, and sometimes we would get a score between 1 and 5, and 5 being the best. We
get a 3.
Well, yeah, you get a 3, but you would want to work on that. You would want to
Correct.
understand why, and then this tool allows us to engage with that individual, which we don't know who it is, but we can engage with them, and then we have found by doing that some really great opinions and, quite frankly, dialogue with the team members, and you're thinking, gosh, you're not that big of an organization. But on some of these things, we were getting more, and it's not that we don't have a trusting environment, it's just sometimes people feel a little bit more comfortable addressing, and one of the things that the team addressed is they wanted more PTO.
Yeah.
And, okay, let's take a look at what that looks like, and we did. We updated our policy, and the explanations that were provided through this, this survey, I mean, basically that's what it is, really helped us understand. Because you and I had different opinions about maybe
what we thought.
And so as leaders, having these types of tools is how you can start to understand really what does make people happy. And what are they needing right now in order to, stay at your company? So
I don't have the winners of the TINYpulse Awards. But they keep those private. I think that's interesting.
Well, they should, because it's...
Yeah. But you have some other winners, but I just wanted to mention that for TINYpulse and the winners that they determine, the ones that they just announced in 2022, so they had changed... They had changed from 2021 to 2022 overall in certain categories. 800 plus TINYpulse customers were measured.
Wow.
Yeah. And they narrowed them down to the top 3 companies that exceeded in highest improvement in engagement index from 2021 to 2022. With organizations with the greatest yearly happiness score improved from 2021 to 2022. So in what Danelle was saying, if you pick your questions from the happiness section where they have questions.
Everything's categorized.
Yeah. And so then they're watching you, right? Like you're polling and you're pulsing, and you understand where people stand in your organization, and they're looking at the macro. Also, things like organizations that celebrated the highest number of wins per capita in 2022. So based on the number of employees, which would be beneficial for us because we don't have a lot of employees. I mean, under 20 employees. Organizations with the highest percentage of theme-based survey questions relating to engagement survey categories. That's very TINYpulse-centric, in my opinion. But those others that I mentioned would be excellent indicators. If you're winning this award, good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. So in terms of this data, Danelle, tell us a little bit about CareerBliss. They're another company that does the happiness index.
Yeah, I think they've been doing this for quite a while, but in 2020, every year they announce the happiest companies of the year. And so in 2022, they recognized the top companies from all over the U.S. Who continued to provide a positive and rewarding work environment despite the impact of COVID and the high amounts of resignations. And so they took independent employee reviews of hundreds of companies over the last year. So that it was independent, and I'm pretty sure it was anonymous as well. And they also reported that, moreover, companies were faced with keeping company culture positive despite dealing with remote workforce as well as many employees resigning. So they used that as being the catalyst for the questions or the survey that was shared. And some of the companies that made the top 10 list, you've definitely heard of these companies. Facebook, which that actually surprised me considering what they've been through, but Facebook was on there. Oracle, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Tesla, American Express, and the number one was Intuit.
Yeah, Intuit.
Yeah, Intuit.
I thought that was interesting.
That's the makers of QuickBooks, right?
I think
okay,
so,
software company. Okay.
Yeah, and Quicken.
Yeah, and so then when they were, what they found out through the reporting, and then obviously the rankings, I think were something, definitely if you're a company that was on that list, but then they also measured the relationship with management and the company CEO, which is interesting, compensation, workplace environment, growth opportunities, and satisfaction with job role, and all the overall workplace setting, which is interesting considering so many companies now have a flexible.
I know. So
the company setting, it would be interesting. I would love to know what those questions were centered around that. I think we could probably borrow from that. And so this data is out there. We'll put a link in the show notes so that you can go take a look at this a little bit deeper. But I think it's just interesting when you're looking at these studies, and what I would recommend that leaders do with this type of information is, depending on, and this, you don't have to do this for your whole company. If you're a leader and you could do this for your team.
Yeah.
I think what it does help us understand is that how we should be, things that we should be considering that we can control. Again, I don't think you can control everyone's happiness. It depends on what the hell they're going through, right? But at the end of the day, I think if we're conscious and we understand that the workforce today, especially if you're of a certain age, and I'm talking about some of us who are 45 and
Wink,
plus, wink, wink,
the ish age,
things that we may not be top of mind for us. It doesn't
Right.
mean it's not for our
somebody
teams.
else.
And that's the thing that I think leaders need to pay attention to. And so for us, we find that this data and we may not participate in these particular things. I mean, obviously we do a TINYpulse, but what we do is we use it as a way to go, gosh, I haven't even thought about that with our team. And so that's what I would recommend. That's why we wanted to have this episode, is to really put some context around what leaders need to be thinking about, and that having a desirable place to work needs to be something that is top of mind if you want to deal with attrition, and if you want to keep your people, and if you want to have a healthy company. So that's why, again, happiness wasn't my favorite term, but
as an owner, I can see how that would be difficult to feel like you have to control happiness. I'm hearing you on that. And as leaders too, I feel like I don't own the company or a company, but I feel like it is partially my job to make sure that people feel comfortable and happy. And I know you feel the same way. But what? And that's what all of this is divulging.
So let me give you this example. And again, this is a bit behind the curtains, and certainly not something you and I spoke about.
Yeah.
But I remember a time where, this was years ago, that things that we did, the team building stuff that we did, or the extracurriculars that we would do at DMA, were largely centered around what I thought as the leader was fun. Or things that I thought brought people together. And of course, if you listen to this podcast, you're not going to be surprised that karaoke was top of that list.
Yeah.
And we had a really great time doing that. And, the happy hours and things that centered around, meals that people would remember. And I do believe, and I know that people appreciated that. But what I was failing to do is to really, quite honestly, ask the organization, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, what is fun for you, and what's fun at work for you? And when I finally opened my eyes to that, there was stuff like people wanted to do crafts.
Yeah.
And Marcy did a backflip, and next thing you know,
crafts.
We have crafts everywhere, and people really enjoyed it. So what we started to do is expand. We didn't get rid of the other things that half the company probably really enjoyed, the karaokeing and the nice meals and cocktails, but we expanded beyond that. And I know that's a bit of a it's probably not the best example in the world, but it was just me opening my eyes to think, gosh, I don't not, people have different opinions on what fun is.
And I want to give
and we do both.
Yeah. And I want to give you some grace there because, and I want to say this out loud because I feel this now in my position and role, is the responsibility and the ownership of, like, where are the volunteers for all these other activities? Like, you and I would get tangled up in that.
We would.
Like, why are we having another karaoke? Well, did anybody say they wanted to do something differently? Or did anybody volunteer to host the next team building? No. 9 times out of 10, no.
Right.
So we transitioned to a monthly volunteer. We're going to have 12 months of milestone events, meaning team building events within our walls. And each month we would like to see someone else lead that effort. And that has turned out to be successful.
That's great.
We pulsed after we made that change. So they were able to compare a before and an after. And they just, by and large, they gravitated towards, quite frankly, they gravitated towards the things that gave them more time to go back to work, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you and I had our druthers, we'd be figuring out more time to go get on a stage. Right? Like,
we would,
well, we can just put that, whatever, put that on the back burner. Let's go sing this karaoke song.
Yeah.
Turns out the large majority of our team was like, no, actually, I want to get back to work. Okay.
Yeah,
Got
that's
it.
great.
Then she and I will just keep singing. Just kidding. Just kidding.
And we do.
But, for leaders that are listening to this and you're thinking like, yeah, I'm really resonating with this. Like, I feel this. Who's volunteering? Ask yourself that question if you're feeling alone in this.
And then if you don't feel like there's a level of support or volunteering to lead these type of activities, then do what worked. We would suggest that you assign it.
Yep.
And people will then take the ownership. But we kind of let ourselves continue down a path of, well, we'll just keep doing it. We'll keep doing the same thing. And looking back on it now, but looking back on it now, I see that we could have.
But it explains the blank stare. Like, you would always say, they just don't. I don't know. Like, I'm getting blank stares when I'm doing a toast, and it was like they had become robots. We hadn't become robots, but they had become robotic in the activity, and that wasn't fulfilling the leadership piece of it. Like, it wasn't achieving what we were aiming for, which was togetherness,
right,
and happiness.
But togetherness should equal happiness.
Equate to or lead to or guide to. Yeah. So if you're giving, like, if we're wrapping this and we're thinking about leaders, I mean, really, what do you want them to take away from this?
I think, listen, and that's why we started this podcast, is that we don't believe that leadership is necessary. Well, first of all, we don't believe that leaders are born.
Right.
It's a decision.
Sometimes I do.
It's a decision. Leadership is a decision. And I think that we do have, when you decide to be a leader, you've also got to own the responsibility of thinking about things that go beyond just the business metrics.
Yeah.
And really start to think about the people that you are leading, and think about it beyond what they're just able to do with the work. And so, and I say that because we are under a microscope.
Yeah, we are.
And I don't think that that's a bad thing. And at least now that we've, in our journey, put me under a microscope.
Sure.
I mean, and because we've decided to be the type of leaders that want to get better every day.
Correct.
And we decided that we wanted to have an organization that not only supported people in their journeys to be the best marketers, because we own a marketing firm, but also the best version of themselves. And so I think that taking a slice of that, the pie that says, okay, what makes a company a good place to work, I do believe that understanding the happiness piece of it is something easy to overlook and push aside, and you can do exactly what I did. I'm not in charge of everybody's happiness around here. It's called work for a reason, like that mentality. And once I let go of that and got comfortable with, Ari's not going to be happy all the time, but we can do some things different to really celebrate the difference of opinions, which obviously we're an organization that cares about individualism.
That's right.
We spend an enormous amount of time and energy and resources towards understanding how people uniquely are and what makes them work and how they're wired. And so because of that and that commitment, it made for me, it was easier for me to say, okay, I do really care. And it's not that I didn't care, I just didn't know what to do about it,
Right.
which is why we're having this discussion with all of you, or this conversation, is so that we can elevate that piece. This is something very soft and easy to ignore on any given day. And so I think that just paying a little bit of attention to that, and so the question is, well, how? Our recommendation is to start with a sentiment survey. I mean, you don't have to invest in TINYpulse.
Right.
You can do it in a number of ways.
Yes.
And I was like, but make sure that it's something that people are comfortable telling you the truth about.
Yes.
And seeking to understand what that is. But if you've been doing the same thing for 10 years and it's that pizza party on the first Tuesday of every month, you know, and you're not seeing people super jazzed about it, there's probably a reason.
Right.
And so
It's funny, ironically, that's kind of where we've gone now. But that's what they want.
Right.
You know, they want simple, they want whatever. But the genesis of how we have, if you're new to Danelle's point, and this is the first time you've listened to this, just know that we've built up to this part. She just mentioned first she trusted, she wanted to lean into the people to show them that she cared about them as individuals and gave them the opportunity to develop in a way that we could all get to know better and nurture their gifts and talents and who they are. Then that led to building trust, which led to the opportunity to ask, to take a sentiment pulse, to get what we believed to be honest feedback.
correct.
Because we had invested that time and that money, quite frankly, and that energy into those humans, they were able to give us proper feedback to help us shape what next looked like. And I'm not saying we're perfect.
No.
We're always learning how to do this, but I'm saying on this journey with us, this podcast journey, just know that the way that the flow of our podcast numbers are is intentional, and starting with those, that investing in them helps you then turn around and invest in you as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, one of the, last points I want to make about this is that, of course, money matters.
Yeah.
And money does matter. And I think compensation is always going to play into the environment of, is this a good place to work? Are people truly happy here? However, the intangibles to me
Have become
for us,
very important.
when you get the intangibles right and you start to think about all the things that we've been discussing here, when you get that part right, it's interesting. A lot of this is reflection, how our money issues with people seem to diffuse. And
Yeah,
I don't
they
think
do.
we didn't, of course, we're constantly looking at our compensation
Yes.
and how to be competitive.
Yes.
And we've talked a lot about that too. We've shared with all of you the investment that we make in people relative to their growth at our company. It's just interesting once we started really paying attention to, again, what's the real skills, the things that people, people's feelings and how they're growing and developing as people, then the money problems that we kept running into with people's, and I'm talking money problems when I say that, I mean people's dissatisfaction with what
Right.
they were being compensated. And when we started to quite honestly talk about compensation as a total,
Correct.
we pay for 100% of insurance, for instance.
Right.
Well, we have to remind people of what that,
Like,
here's what that value is, right? And so
and retirement contribution and cell phones and
absolutely. So I think
all the wonderful things.
when we started talking about those things, though, relative to compensation, and we started focusing on how people were feeling about our organization and how they were growing and developing, it changed. It
did. It
literally took care. It took care of that uncomfortableness that we were dealing with for a while. We couldn't quite put our finger on it, and we kept thinking it was money.
That's
you know
right.
what happens when you throw money at something to fix it? It's going to come back around,
Yeah.
and it's going to be broken again pretty soon.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway,
You're right. We have learned that lesson too. So listeners, hopefully what's happening in your minds and hearts right now is you might be on the side of, hey, I work at one of these fantastic companies.
Great.
Good for you. High five. Yay. And for the rest of us who also work for very wonderful companies and wonderful causes, how are our people perceiving that? Mm-hmm. And how are they living their lives? Are they living their lives in a happy way under your leadership? To me, that's very important to me. So I'm glad that you've been on this journey with us here today, listeners. Okay, since we're in New York and as we transition to Music Moment, I thought it would be fun if you would just tell us, because I know you have a whole playlist. I've heard it 100 times, and I love it. But if you had to narrow down one song about New York, so Danelle has a whole playlist dedicated to New York.
New York.
And this playlist is a good 10 years old?
Yeah, I've been working on it for a long time.
A long time. Mm-hmm. It's in Spotify, and we will put it in the show notes in case you want to listen.
Yeah.
But it's songs she's curated. What is your favorite song? Like when you really think, like maybe when you're landing at LaGuardia or JFK.
Yeah, so a little bit of why are we talking about a New York playlist is because I would come here a lot, and then I like to kind of get in the mood. Like get myself excited about a city that I'm going to. And it's when I started to research and really start to think about songs, I don't know that there's another city that has more. LA, I actually
Paris,
have LA maybe Paris, but I mean songs that really sing and help you understand the city.
Sure.
And the heartbeat of it, I can't. I mean, there's definitely not a lot of Dallas out there.
No.
So I started putting this together, and it would get me so excited. If I knew I was coming to New York, I would listen to it on the airplane. I would share it if people were coming here with me, and then obviously with Mackie Payton going to school here, it just kept growing. And what's interesting is I hear new music all the time that I'll add to it. But asking me what my favorite song is, Alicia Keys' Empire State of a Mind is that song, if you really listen to all of the lyrics.
Yes.
Now that I live here, I think I would pick that. But there's so many on the playlist that I love. I mean, Norah Jones sings a lot about, there's several Norah songs on there. Sarah McLachlan sings a lot about Manhattan. And it's interesting because sometimes it's about Manhattan. Sometimes it's about New York. Sometimes it's New York is the lover. I mean, there's several songs on there where they're talking about New York took my significant other. So it's just interesting to listen to music with that particular subject in mind. And now I hear stuff all the time. It's just an interesting. But I love to share it, and I'd love if there's a New York song on there that I've missed, please let me know.
For sure. Well, I would definitely say Alicia
What about
Keys.
you?
Yeah. And tell me if I'm right or wrong here. Are there two versions of that? There's one with Jay-Z, one without Jay-Z.
Right. The other one is the one that I like because she's just playing the piano.
Okay, my favorite's the one with
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z.
Of course yours is the favorite with Jay-Z. Yeah.
So we'll put a link to both of those in our show notes so that you can listen. But man, if you haven't heard that Alicia Keys song, let me just tell you.
I'm sure that's
y'all are missing out.
Surely they.
I mean, I think if they play it now on like New Year's Eve when the ball drops, they play that.
Yeah.
They play always. Of course, they play Frank Sinatra. But shortly thereafter or before, Alicia's in the mix.
Yeah, that's become one of the city songs for sure.
Yes,
modern day.
So get you some, listeners. All right, and with that, we'll bring today's episode to a close. Thank you so much. Don't forget, show notes, going to be rich with content. This week, we gave you a lot of stats, so we'll recap those and the sources. Please tell a friend about the podcast. Y'all are doing a great job, by the way, doing that, because I hear about it a lot. Oh, so-and-so told me. I'm like, oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
We're getting DMs and all kinds of cool stuff when we're out there in the world. And until next week, we send you into the week with grateful hearts.
Goodbye, everyone. As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcasts. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming self-smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.